This is True Crime Stories for Sleep. In the summer of 1937, Amelia Earhart, already celebrated as one of the most daring aviators of her era, prepared for the most ambitious journey of her life, a circumnavigation of the globe along the equator. Her aircraft, a Lockheed Model 10E Electra, had been carefully modified to carry extra fuel, navigation instruments, and supplies necessary for the perilous stretches over the Pacific Ocean. Earhart had flown across oceans before, faced storms and mechanical failures, but this leg of her journey, spanning thousands of miles over open water, demanded precision, endurance, and unwavering courage. Every detail mattered, every calculation, every weather report, and every radio communication could determine the difference between triumph and disaster. Before we continue into the heart of this mystery, if you're captivated by the stories of history's most haunting disappearances, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment where you're reading from. Your engagement helps us continue sharing carefully researched, cinematic accounts of the unexplained, tales where ambition, isolation, and nature collide in ways that defy resolution. Now, let's follow Amelia Earhart as she embarks on a flight that would become one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. The journey from New Guinea, to tiny Howland Island was the most dangerous leg of Earhart's global attempt. The route stretched over 2,500 miles of open ocean, with no opportunity for emergency landings and a landing target barely 2 miles wide. Navigational tools of the time were rudimentary compared to modern standards. Celestial navigation, dead reckoning, and radio direction finding were all Earhart had to guide her through the featureless expanse of the Pacific. Her navigator, Fred Noonan, had decades of maritime and aerial experience, yet even he could only provide estimated positions, relying on star sightings and careful calculations to chart their path. On the morning of July 2, 1937, the Electra lifted off La's grassy runway. Engines purred with a steady hum, carrying Earhart and Noonan into the dawn sky. The aircraft climbed to cruising altitude as the crew began routine checks. Noonan consulted his charts, making calculations to correct for wind drift and current airspeed. Early radio transmissions to La and the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, stationed near Howland Island, were routine but provided reassurance that the flight was on course. For hours, the Electra soared over a vast, unbroken ocean, passengers and crew members' fates unknowable below them. By mid-morning, as the plane approached the final stretch, the Pacific began to reveal its perilous nature. Endless horizons and uniform water surfaces made visual navigation nearly impossible. Radio signals from the Itasca were weak and inconsistent, hampered by atmospheric interference. Earhart reported cloud layers and strong winds, making navigation increasingly challenging. Despite these difficulties, her messages remained composed and precise, relaying estimated positions, altitudes, and conditions. The radio contact was crucial. The pilots depended on the guidance of the Itasca for safe approach to Howland Island. At 6:14 a.m., a transmission from Earhart reached the Itasca. "We are about 200 miles out." The message confirmed she was still airborne and functional, but it was effectively a one-way communication. Attempts to respond failed due to equipment incompatibility and static interference. Minutes passed as the Electra drifted toward the island, with pilots scanning the ocean below and horizon ahead for visual cues. Every mile traveled without visual confirmation heightened the stakes. The aircraft carried finite fuel, and errors in heading or calculation could prove fatal. By 7:42 a.m., Earhart sent the final known message. "We must be on you but cannot see you." She described flying at 1,000 feet and attempted to correct her heading based on assumed positions. Then silence. The Electra disappeared from radar, leaving nothing but questions and conjecture. The vastness of the Pacific swallowed the aircraft entirely. Despite extensive monitoring and immediate reports to search authorities, no further communication was ever received. The Electra had vanished in one of the most isolated stretches of ocean on Earth. Search operations began immediately. The Itasca coordinated with aircraft and ships to comb the surrounding waters for signs of the aircraft or survivors. Days turned into weeks as naval vessels scanned hundreds of square miles, searching for oil slicks, debris, or life rafts. Despite the magnitude of the search, no confirmed wreckage was found. Ocean currents, heavy seas, and the sheer scale of the search area frustrated recovery efforts. Investigators faced the challenge of locating a relatively small object in an immense, unpredictable environment, highlighting the extreme vulnerability of aircraft over open water. Speculation about Earhart's fate arose almost immediately. Some theorized that she and Noonan ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific, sinking without trace. Others suggested that navigational errors caused the Electra to miss Howland Island entirely, perhaps leading to a distant atoll or uninhabited island. More speculative theories proposed capture by foreign powers, survival in secret, or deliberate disappearance. Newspapers, radio programs, and public discourse amplified each theory, weaving Earhart's disappearance into the cultural consciousness as a mystery that blended reality with legend. Investigators analyzed the situation from multiple angles. Fuel estimates were recalculated based on known performance data and observed winds. Radio logs were scrutinized for clues about position and potential distress signals. Sonar scans of the seabed and analysis of ocean currents attempted to trace probable paths for floating debris. Small artifacts, later recovered from islands in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, provided tantalizing but inconclusive evidence. Each clue offered the possibility of closure while reinforcing the elusiveness of certainty. The disappearance also illustrates the intersection of human ambition and environmental forces. Earhart had meticulously prepared for this flight, yet the vastness of the Pacific, combined with primitive navigation and unpredictable conditions, created a scenario in which even extraordinary skill could be rendered ineffective. The Electra's vanishing reminds us that technology, courage, and careful planning, while essential, are sometimes insufficient against the scale of nature. Cultural impact further amplified the significance of the disappearance. Amelia Earhart had become a symbol of bravery, innovation, and breaking societal boundaries. Her sudden absence transformed her from a celebrated aviator into a legend of unresolved intrigue. Films, books, and documentaries retold her story, blending meticulous research with dramatic speculation. The public's fascination endures because the disappearance represents not only the unknown fate of one person but also the limits of human mastery in the face of nature's enormity. Even decades later, researchers continue to explore new evidence. Advances in deep-sea scanning, ocean drift modeling, and archival research aim to shed light on the Electra's final moments. Each expedition, whether successful or inconclusive, underscores the persistence of human curiosity and the refusal to leave a story unresolved. Amelia Earhart's disappearance remains both a historical mystery and a cultural touchstone, a reminder that even the most extraordinary human achievements can encounter unpredictable forces that erase them from sight. Ultimately, the story of Amelia Earhart is one of courage and enduring mystery. Her final flight transformed from a record-setting attempt into a narrative that continues to captivate and haunt. The Pacific, vast and indifferent, became both a literal and symbolic agent of disappearance, leaving behind only fragments of communication, speculation, and legend. Earhart's story persists not because it was completed, but because it remains unresolved, a testament to ambition, skill, and the terrifying power of the unknown. In 1587, more than 100 English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. They were led by John White, appointed governor of the new colony by Sir Walter Raleigh, tasked with establishing England's first permanent foothold in the Americas. The settlers included men, women, and children, carrying tools, provisions, and hopes for a new beginning. The island, covered in dense forests and marshlands, presented both opportunity and peril. While the land offered fertile soil and access to water, it also demanded survival skills, adaptability, and the ability to navigate relationships with the region's Native American tribes, whose cooperation could mean the difference between life and death. The settlers worked to build homes, clear fields, and establish basic governance. Relations with neighboring tribes were mixed, sometimes cordial, sometimes tense, but the colony managed to survive initial hardships. Yet, resources were limited, and England's support was slow to arrive. In late 1587, John White returned to England to gather supplies, leaving the colonists in the care of interim leaders. His journey, delayed by political and military conflicts including tensions with Spain, extended far beyond what anyone anticipated. Weeks turned into months, and months into years, as the colony remained isolated from reinforcements or updates from home. When White finally returned in 1590, the sight that met him was startling and silent. The settlement was abandoned. Houses and fortifications remained intact but uninhabited. There were no signs of violent struggle, no bodies, no evidence of disease or famine. The only clue was the word Croton, carved into a post, and CRO, etched into a nearby tree. White had instructed the colonists to leave a clear message if they relocated, but no further notes or indications explained their movements. The mystery of the lost colony had begun, leaving the fate of over 100 men, women, and children unresolved. One plausible theory suggests the settlers relocated to Croton Island, named after the Native American tribe living there, or integrated with the tribe itself. Artifacts recovered in later centuries, including fragments of European-style tools and pottery, provide circumstantial evidence supporting this hypothesis. Some descendants of local tribes claim oral histories of assimilated settlers, though these accounts remain anecdotal. The lack of definitive records leaves the theory plausible but unconfirmed, illustrating the difficulty of reconstructing history from fragmentary evidence. Alternative theories abound. Some historians argue the colony may have been destroyed by hostile tribes or succumbed to disease, famine, or environmental disaster. Hurricanes, frequent along the Outer Banks, could have swept through the area, dispersing survivors or obliterating traces of settlement. Another hypothesis proposes that the settlers attempted to return to England or move inland to establish new colonies but perished in the attempt. Each explanation contains elements of possibility, but none can be substantiated, leaving the disappearance enigmatic. John White's own writings convey both hope and despair. In his journals, he recorded meticulous observations of the colony's early life, noting the construction of shelters, cultivation of crops, and interactions with Native Americans. Upon his return, his journals shift tone, documenting the eerie emptiness of the settlement and the mysterious message carved into the post. White searched the surrounding islands for signs of life, but his efforts yielded no definitive evidence. His accounts remain the most detailed contemporary record, yet they raise as many questions as they answer. The disappearance of Roanoke is compounded by the historical context of English colonization. Settlers were pushed into unfamiliar and hostile environments, often under political and logistical pressure. Supplies were limited, travel was slow, and communication with England was intermittent. Survival required careful planning, local knowledge, and adaptability. Even minor mistakes in food production, navigation, or diplomacy could prove fatal. The Roanoke settlers faced all these challenges simultaneously, and any misstep could have led to complete disappearance from recorded history. Archaeological research continues to explore the region for traces of the colony. Excavations on Roanoke Island and nearby islands have uncovered 16th-century European artifacts, from pottery fragments to structural remains. While these finds suggest European presence, they do not conclusively link to the lost colony. Studies of Native American settlements have also attempted to identify evidence of assimilation, though definitive proof remains elusive. Every discovery fuels speculation and debate, highlighting both the potential for insight and the persistent absence of closure. The cultural and historical significance of Roanoke has grown over time. Beyond its immediate mystery, the lost colony embodies the perils of colonization, isolation, and human ambition. The story has inspired countless books, films, and academic studies, embedding the narrative into the broader consciousness of American and global history. The colony's disappearance serves as a case study in risk, human resilience, and the fragility of settlements in unknown environments. Historians continue to explore environmental explanations. The Outer Banks are prone to hurricanes, shifting sandbars, and floods, which could have erased physical traces of the settlement or forced relocation. Climate data and tree-ring analysis provide partial insight into weather patterns of the late 16th century, supporting theories of environmental impact. Combined with limited documentation and oral histories, these data points create a multi-layered, though incomplete, reconstruction of what might have occurred during those critical years. Human factors remain central to understanding Roanoke's disappearance. Leadership dynamics, group cohesion, and decision-making under stress could have influenced outcomes. In the absence of John White, settlers may have struggled to maintain discipline or negotiate with neighboring tribes effectively. Social and logistical challenges could have prompted relocation or dispersion. Such internal factors, combined with external threats from environment and potential conflict, illustrate the precariousness of the colony's situation. Roanoke's story continues to captivate because it combines concrete historical elements with enduring mystery. Unlike individual disappearances, the scale of the lost colony emphasizes communal vulnerability and the limits of human control in uncertain circumstances. Archaeologists, historians, and amateur researchers alike continue to piece together fragments of evidence, hoping to illuminate the fate of those who vanished. Every artifact recovered, every new analysis, represents a step toward understanding, yet also underscores how much remains unknowable. The legacy of the lost colony extends into broader lessons on exploration, human resilience, and the unforeseen consequences of ambition. It is a story of opportunity and danger, hope and despair, survival and vanishing. The unanswered questions, what became of the settlers, where they went, and how they lived or perished, linger across centuries, a testament to both human curiosity and the enduring power of mystery. On the evening of March 7, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777, departed Kuala Lumpur International Airport bound for Beijing. On board were 239 passengers and crew, representing 14 different nationalities. The flight began like any other, climbing steadily over the South China Sea, as travelers settled into the quiet hum of the aircraft. Cabin lights dimmed, and passengers watched in-flight entertainment, or rested for the 6-hour journey. But somewhere over the Gulf of Thailand, the routine shifted into something inexplicable. The aircraft would vanish from radar, leaving behind one of the most confounding aviation mysteries of modern history. Approximately 40 minutes after takeoff, at 1:19 a.m. local time, the flight made its last routine communication with air traffic control. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the aircraft's transponder, the device used to broadcast its position and altitude, stopped transmitting. The plane effectively disappeared from civilian radar screens. Military radar, however, later recorded an unidentified aircraft deviating from its planned route, turning west across the Malay Peninsula before continuing south toward the vast stretches of the Indian Ocean. The motive, reasoning, or cause behind the deviation remains unknown. Whether this was deliberate, mechanical, or catastrophic is still subject to debate. Investigators immediately launched search and rescue operations. Ships, aircraft, and satellites scoured the Gulf of Thailand, the Strait of Malacca, and eventually, areas far into the southern Indian Ocean. Initial searches relied on estimated flight paths and radar data, but the vastness of the ocean, combined with unpredictable weather and limited information, made the task near impossible. Every hour of delay diminished the possibility of finding survivors. The search area expanded to hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, highlighting both the challenge and urgency of locating an aircraft that had vanished from view. Experts analyzed several potential causes. Mechanical failure was considered, engine malfunction, cabin depressurization, or catastrophic fire. Human factors were also explored: pilot error, deliberate course deviation, or hijacking. Each theory had evidence for and against, yet the absence of cockpit voice recorders or black boxes for the initial months left investigators to rely heavily on secondary data. Satellite handshakes, pings sent from the aircraft's communications system to an orbiting satellite, helped establish an approximate path, known as the Inmarsat arc, but offered no precise location or insight into what occurred on board. As news of the disappearance spread, families of the passengers faced an agonizing uncertainty. They relied on piecemeal information, media speculation, and official statements to understand the unfolding crisis. Airline authorities communicated cautiously, balancing empathy with realism, while the public watched a global drama in real time. Social media amplified both accurate updates and unverified reports, contributing to an environment where hope and anxiety coexisted in equal measure. Months passed with no confirmed trace of the aircraft. Sonar mapping, aerial reconnaissance, and deep-sea scans failed to locate the main fuselage or the flight recorders. Currents, shifting ocean floors, and debris dispersal complicated the search. It became clear that finding MH370 would not be a matter of routine aviation recovery. It required unprecedented coordination, technological resources, and patience. Despite the difficulties, teams from multiple countries continued the search, committed to recovering even the smallest fragments. The first tangible piece of evidence arrived in July 2015 when a flaperon, a wing control surface, was discovered on Réunion Island in the western Indian Ocean. Analysis confirmed it belonged to a Boeing 777, offering the first definitive proof that MH370 had indeed crashed into the Indian Ocean. Subsequent debris was discovered along coastlines of Africa and islands scattered across the Indian Ocean, including pieces of seats, panels, and luggage. While these findings corroborated the plane's crash, they provided no insight into the sequence of events, the final moments, or the reasons for deviation. Theories about the disappearance proliferated. Some proposed deliberate action by a crew member, citing the sudden course change and the transponder shutdown. Others suggested mechanical failure or catastrophic fire, pointing to scenarios where control may have been lost over the southern Indian Ocean. Conspiracy theories, from hijacking to government cover-ups, gained attention but lacked evidence. Each scenario added complexity, reflecting both the technical and human fascination with the case, while highlighting the limits of certainty when physical evidence is scarce. The investigation relied heavily on satellite data, ocean drift modeling, and simulations of potential crash scenarios. Experts traced currents to estimate where floating debris might appear, leading to search patterns across thousands of square kilometers. Sonar mapping explored the ocean floor for wreckage, but the Indian Ocean's depth and geological features created extreme challenges. Every effort underscored the difficulty of reconciling technical analysis with real-world variables, weather, currents, and the vast scale of the search area. Flight MH370 also transformed aviation safety protocols. The disappearance prompted revisions in aircraft tracking, including more frequent satellite reporting and enhanced radar coverage over oceanic routes. Airlines began implementing real-time location monitoring for long-haul flights, ensuring that in the event of emergencies, aircraft positions would be continually updated. The tragedy highlighted vulnerabilities in even the most advanced transportation systems, revealing gaps between technological capability and environmental challenges. For the families and investigators, the human dimension remained central. Each passenger represented a life interrupted, a network of family and friends left in uncertainty. Airlines established support groups and counseling, while governments coordinated investigative efforts across national boundaries. Emotional and logistical challenges compounded the technical difficulties, emphasizing that the disaster extended beyond aviation into human tragedy. Despite years of research, simulation, and search expeditions, MH370's final resting place remains unknown. The plane has become a ghost of modern aviation, a tangible object erased from view by the vastness of the ocean. Satellite pings, partial debris, and reconstructed flight paths offer fragments of insight, yet no complete narrative exists. The enduring mystery reflects both the unpredictability of natural forces and the limits of human understanding, even in an era of sophisticated technology. MH370's disappearance exemplifies the intersection of human error, environmental factors, and technological limits. The flight's abrupt deviation, combined with the immense scale of the Indian Ocean, created a scenario where even advanced safety measures could not prevent total loss. It demonstrates how, despite rigorous planning and expertise, the confluence of circumstances can render a sophisticated system invisible, leaving only speculation, partial evidence, and unanswered questions. The ongoing fascination with MH370 also illustrates a collective need to understand the unexplained. Scholars, engineers, journalists, and amateur sleuths continue to examine every detail, from satellite data to ocean currents. Each hypothesis, whether supported or refuted, contributes to the ongoing reconstruction of events. The mystery has become part of global consciousness, not merely as a technical problem but as a human story of uncertainty, loss, and relentless search for answers. Even years after the event, the narrative of MH370 remains incomplete. The absence of definitive evidence transforms it from a historical event into a modern legend, where imagination, analysis, and fact collide. The disappearance is not only about a missing aircraft, it represents the vulnerability of human endeavors when confronted by vast, uncontrollable forces. The story endures because, like the plane itself, it occupies a space between the known and the unknowable. On July 30, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa stood in the parking lot of the Machu's Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, checking his watch. The summer heat pressed down on the pavement, and traffic hummed along Telegraph Road. Hoffa, once one of the most powerful labor leaders in the United States, had arrived for a meeting with two men he believed he knew well. He had been waiting for 30 minutes. He did not like being kept waiting. Not by anyone, and certainly not by men who owed him favors. At 2:45 p.m., he called his wife from a payphone, irritation coloring his voice. And then, sometime after that call, he vanished from the face of the earth. Hoffa's disappearance became an instant national crisis. For decades he had been the public face of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a union whose influence reached deep into American industry. Hoffa was charismatic, shrewd, and unafraid of confrontation. He built his power through a mix of stubborn advocacy for workers and strategic alliances with organized crime figures. It was an era when labor disputes could escalate into street violence, and Hoffa knew how to navigate those dangerous currents. But by 1975, the alliances he once relied on had grown strained. His enemies were no longer rivals across a negotiating table. They sat among the very men he once called allies. His meeting that day was supposed to involve Anthony, Tony Giacalone, a Detroit mob figure known for his influence and volatility, and Anthony, Tony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official with a violent reputation. Hoffa had clashed with Tony Pro in prison years earlier, an encounter that left the two men with deep hostility. Yet Hoffa believed this meeting might help him reclaim his leadership position in the Union. He was convinced he could return to power despite federal restrictions and internal resistance. Those close to him, however, warned that the mob was no longer willing to tolerate his ambitions. The Teamsters had changed. The alliances had shifted. Hoffa, once feared, was now considered a liability. Police quickly focused on the Red Fox parking lot. Hoffa's car was still there, a dark green Pontiac Grandville. In the passenger seat sat a single grocery bag containing a ham, a gift he had planned to bring to a friend after the meeting. Inside the restaurant, staff reported they had seen nothing unusual. No one recalled Hoffa entering the building. He had simply vanished between one breath and the next, leaving behind only a few scattered clues and a long list of dangerous associations. Investigators began unraveling the final days of Hoffa's life. His world was a tight knot of ambition, betrayal, and pressure. He had served time in federal prison for bribery and jury tampering, but President Richard Nixon had commuted his sentence on the condition that Hoffa stay out of Union activity until 1980. Hoffa had no intention of honoring that condition. He was determined to take back the Teamsters, even if it meant confronting those who had filled the power vacuum during his absence. The mob, which had grown accustomed to more compliant leadership, viewed Hoffa's return as a threat to business as usual. Hoffa believed he still had the upper hand, but the landscape had changed more than he realized. Witnesses later reported seeing Hoffa standing outside the restaurant, pacing, scanning the parking lot, and growing visibly angry. A few recalled seeing him approached by a vehicle, a maroon Mercury Marquis with men inside, but accounts varied in detail and reliability. By the time investigators pieced together these sightings, the trail had already gone cold. Hoffa had been missing for less than 24 hours when federal authorities launched a massive search effort. The FBI joined local law enforcement, combing through fields, digging up landfills, and interviewing dozens of mob associates. Tips came in from all over the country, some plausible, most not. The case grew bigger than the disappearance itself. It evolved into a national obsession. As investigators looked deeper, they realized how many people had reason to silence Hoffa. He knew too much. He had assisted mob figures for years, using Teamster pension funds to finance their ventures. He understood their decision-making, their methods, their vulnerabilities. If he regained control of the union, he could expose them. Some believed Hoffa, pushed into a corner, might have made threats. Others suggested he was simply too determined to acknowledge the danger he faced. His confidence, once his greatest strength, may have blinded him to the shifting loyalties around him. Mob informants eventually provided partial accounts. They whispered about a meeting gone wrong, about Hoffa being led into a car under false pretenses, about a sudden act of violence. But these accounts lacked hard evidence. Stories surfaced about a house in Detroit where Hoffa may have been killed, about a crematorium used to dispose of the body, about farmland where he might have been buried. Each version differed in detail, but all shared one thread: Hoffa never saw the inside of the Red Fox that day. He never made it to any meeting. He was intercepted before he had the chance. One theory pointed investigators to a house in northwest Detroit, owned by a Teamster associate. Supposedly, Hoffa was lured there on the promise that Tony Pro was waiting. Once inside, the story went, he was killed quickly, his body placed in the trunk of a car and transported to an unknown location. Forensic tests years later revealed traces of blood in the home, but not enough to identify or confirm any link to Hoffa. Another theory involved a waste disposal site controlled by mob-connected businesses. It suggested Hoffa was crushed and destroyed beyond recovery. Searches at landfills and industrial sites yielded nothing conclusive. The FBI spent years pursuing leads, each one twisting into another dead end. Hoffa's family lived under the heavy weight of grief without closure. His son, James P. Hoffa, later rose to lead the Teamsters, carrying the shadow of his father's disappearance into his own tenure. For those closest to the case, the pain was etched into daily life. The unanswered question hovered over every conversation: who had the power, motive, and opportunity to make Hoffa disappear so cleanly? By the 1980s, the case had become legendary. Books, documentaries, and rumors multiplied. Every few years, a new tip surfaced. Someone claimed Hoffa was buried under Giants Stadium, or hidden in an unmarked grave, or dissolved in acid. Each claim stirred public interest, yet none contained verifiable evidence. The FBI officially closed its active investigation decades later, acknowledging that the most likely scenario involved a small group of mob-connected individuals removing Hoffa swiftly and disposing of his remains in a manner designed to prevent any possibility of recovery. The story of Jimmy Hoffa endures because it reflects the collision between power, loyalty, and the perilous world he helped create. He rose through the ranks by mastering negotiation and intimidation. He built alliances that offered protection in one era and danger in the next. When the balance shifted, Hoffa found himself without the safety net he had once woven so carefully. His disappearance remains a symbol of how quickly influence can evaporate, how swiftly a powerful man can be erased when he becomes inconvenient to the forces he once navigated with precision. Nearly 50 years later, Hoffa remains missing. No remains, no crime scene, no definitive account of his final moments. Yet his story continues to haunt history, a reminder that even the most public figures can vanish into the shadows when secrets grow too heavy and enemies too close. On the night of December 24, 1945, the Sauter family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, was engulfed in flames. George Sauter, a Sicilian immigrant and local entrepreneur, was jolted awake by the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling flames. His wife, Jenny, screamed as they realized the fire had quickly overtaken the house. Their 9 children, ranging in age from 5 to 17, were asleep upstairs. In the chaos, George and Jenny tried to rescue them, breaking through locked doors and smashing windows, but the blaze advanced faster than they could act. By the time neighbors arrived, the fire had consumed most of the structure. Amid the charred ruins, 4 of the Sadr children were missing. 5 had escaped unharmed, but the remaining 4 had vanished without a trace. Initial accounts suggested the children had perished in the inferno, their bodies reduced to ashes. George and Jenny searched desperately, calling the fire department and digging through the debris. Local officials, however, noted a peculiar absence. No identifiable remains of the missing children were found. The fire was intense, but experts later questioned whether it could have completely obliterated 5 young bodies without leaving bone fragments. The lack of physical evidence planted the seeds of doubt in the Sadr's minds. From that night forward, the story of the Sadr children became one not just of tragedy but of mystery. The Sadrs were a large, tight-knit family. George owned a local bus company, and Jenny managed the household with meticulous care. Their children were known throughout the community for their energy, intelligence, and curiosity. On Christmas Eve, the family had celebrated with tradition, dinner, gifts, and laughter. Some of the children had argued playfully, while others were already asleep, unaware that the night would erupt into disaster. The fire seemed sudden, yet some neighbors later reported suspicious activity nearby. Lights in the surrounding hills flickered, and a truck was seen parked near the property earlier that evening. These seemingly minor observations would later fuel theories of foul play. As the fire raged, George Sadr attempted to call the fire department from the nearest phone, but the lines were dead, a fact he would later attribute to possible sabotage. By the time reinforcements arrived, the family home was a ruin. George and Jenny sifted through the ashes for any sign of their children, but the remains were scant. 5 of their children were accounted for. Marion, George Jr., Louis, Maurice, and Betty had escaped to safety or were rescued. But for Bobby, Jenny, Martha, and Fred, the evidence of death was minimal. This absence of proof left George and Jenny with a haunting suspicion. Had their children been taken, rather than killed? Investigators initially treated the fire as accidental, possibly caused by faulty wiring or a Christmas tree candle. Yet several inconsistencies troubled George and Jenny. The ladder to the children's bedroom had been removed. Window latches were inexplicably locked. Witnesses reported seeing strange cars circling the neighborhood in the weeks leading up to Christmas. George suspected an act of vengeance. A few years prior, he had criticized Benito Mussolini in a speech and reportedly clashed with members of the Sicilian American community over wartime politics. Could the children have been targeted for reasons beyond the ordinary? While authorities dismissed these claims as speculation, George pursued them relentlessly. Over the years, George Sadr received numerous tips and letters suggesting the children were alive. Some claimed to have spotted them in cities across the United States. One mysterious photograph surfaced showing 5 children in a European setting, marked with handwriting reading, "Your children are well." None of these leads could be definitively verified. Despite repeated attempts to trace the origins of the letters and photos, the sources remained elusive. Yet the possibility, however faint, that the children might have survived burned in George's mind as strongly as the fire that had destroyed his home. The Sadr family launched a decades-long campaign to keep the story alive. They placed missing person signs in major newspapers and hung a large banner on a nearby hill, facing the main road, reading, "Have you seen these children?" The image included photographs of the missing 4, now grown, as they might have appeared over the years. George and Jenny refused to accept the official narrative of death, maintaining a relentless search for clues. The case became a fixture in both local lore and national headlines, inspiring debates about child abduction, organized crime, and government complicity. Over time, investigators revisited the fire. Fire analysis experts reviewed the site and concluded that the blaze had burned unevenly. Certain areas of the home, particularly the children's bedrooms, had been less affected by heat than the main living areas. Some debris suggested that the fire may have been started intentionally, though definitive proof remained elusive. These technical details did not provide answers, but they reinforced the Sadr's belief that the disappearance was not an accident. For George, the fire was a diversion. The children had been taken, he believed, by people who knew the family and understood the layout of the house. The case also exposed limitations in mid-20th century investigation methods. Fire documentation, evidence preservation, and child recovery protocols were rudimentary compared to modern standards. Investigators lacked DNA technology and detailed tracking systems, relying instead on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence. By the time forensic tools had advanced enough to re-examine historical cases, key physical evidence had been destroyed in the blaze or lost over decades of storage. These constraints left the Sodder mystery perpetually unresolved, a puzzle complicated by time and circumstance. Some researchers have proposed links between the Sodder disappearance and organized crime networks. George Sodder had engaged with local labor unions, some of which had connections to the mafia. Others point to political motivations, suggesting that George's outspoken criticism of fascist sympathizers could have led to retaliatory action. While compelling, these theories remain speculative. No arrests were made, and no tangible evidence definitively connects the children's disappearance to any criminal organization. Still, the combination of motive, opportunity, and suspicious activity surrounding the fire continues to intrigue investigators and historians. The emotional weight of the disappearance persisted long after the fire. George and Jenny lived the rest of their lives haunted by uncertainty. They refused to move forward without clarity about their children, a stance that inspired both admiration and empathy. Siblings who survived the fire struggled with survivor guilt, unanswered questions, and the constant media attention that followed the family. The story became a cautionary tale of vulnerability, community vigilance, and the limits of official investigation in a time before modern forensic science. The Sodder children case continues to spark fascination in popular culture. Books, documentaries, and podcasts revisit the events, examining witness statements, photographs, and letters. Each retelling emphasizes the ambiguity. 5 children disappeared without a trace, leaving only scorched ruins, a family's grief, and tantalizing, unsolved questions. Experts continue to debate whether the children perished in the fire or were abducted, weighing evidence that remains frustratingly incomplete. Every clue, no matter how small, offers hope, conjecture, and frustration in equal measure. Ultimately, the disappearance of the Sodder children is a story of unresolved tragedy. It embodies the fear, uncertainty, and relentless search for answers that define many historical disappearances. George and Jenny's decades-long pursuit of truth transformed a single night of disaster into a lifetime quest, leaving an enduring imprint on both local history and the broader cultural imagination. The story endures because it is not a closed case. The fire consumed the house, but it never consumed the hope or determination of a family unwilling to accept the absence of evidence as the final word. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727, prepared to depart Portland, Oregon, bound for Seattle. On board were 75 passengers, unaware that one man would soon transform an ordinary flight into one of the most notorious unsolved mysteries in U.S. history. A man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded quietly, dressed in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. Tall, composed, and unassuming, he blended into the crowd. Flight attendants noted nothing extraordinary about him during boarding. No one suspected that in a few short hours, Cooper would disappear into legend. Shortly after takeoff, the man handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. The note claimed he had a bomb in his briefcase and instructed her not to reveal its contents to the crew. When she peeked inside, she saw wires and red cylinders, a rudimentary but convincing imitation of an explosive device. Calmly, he explained his demands: $200,000 in cash, for parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by upon arrival in Seattle. He requested secrecy, emphasizing that any sudden moves could trigger detonation. For Schaffner and the other flight crew, the situation was surreal, mixing precision, danger, and an unsettling composure. She would later describe Cooper as polite, almost courteous, even as he threatened violence. By the time the plane landed in Seattle, authorities were mobilized but uncertain how to respond. Negotiations began in the airport terminal, while Cooper maintained control on board. He allowed some passengers to leave in exchange for the demanded ransom and parachutes. Police strategists and FBI agents weighed their options, balancing the risk to remaining hostages against the potential danger of Cooper's plan. Every interaction, every command, was measured and deliberate. Cooper's demeanor was methodical. He provided instructions with calm authority, giving no indication of panic or impulsivity. It was clear he understood both the mechanics of flight and the psychology of negotiation. After receiving the ransom and parachutes, Cooper instructed the pilots to take off again, specifying a course toward Mexico City at a low altitude and with landing gear deployed. Inside the cockpit, the crew complied, but the tension was palpable. Cooper returned to the rear of the plane, monitoring the cabin while preparing for the next phase of his plan. Around 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the rugged terrain of the Pacific Northwest, Cooper opened the aft stairs and leapt into the night sky, carrying the ransom with him. No one witnessed the jump directly, but sudden changes in cabin pressure, the sound of rushing air, and the plane's slight lurch confirmed he had vanished into darkness. The Boeing 727 continued flying without him, leaving investigators with an empty seat and a loaded mystery. Searches began immediately, spanning thousands of square miles of forests, rivers, and mountains in Washington and Oregon. Helicopters, search teams, and river patrols combed the region, but weather, dense forests, and rugged topography hampered efforts. Snow and heavy rainfall further complicated visibility. Investigators relied on estimated drop points based on flight speed, altitude, and wind conditions. Parachute tracks were sought, footprints scanned, and waterways examined, but no definitive trace emerged. The enormity of the search area rendered success improbable, particularly given the limited technology of 1971. As the weeks passed, leads multiplied, yet all proved inconclusive. Witness reports of a man fitting Cooper's description were inconsistent. Items resembling the ransom were rumored in remote locations but never verified. Experts debated whether he survived the jump at all. Parachuting at night, into cold, rugged terrain with minimal training, suggested a high probability of fatality. Yet the absence of a body, combined with the precise execution of the hijacking, fueled speculation that Cooper had escaped successfully. The FBI pursued over 1,000 leads, investigated hundreds of suspects, and interviewed anyone with potential connections, yet the case grew colder by the year. The mystery deepened in 1980, when a young boy discovered $5,800 in $20 bills buried along the Columbia River, near Vancouver, Washington. The serial numbers matched those of Cooper's ransom, providing tangible evidence that some money had survived. How the bills arrived at the riverbank remained unexplained. Some suggested accidental loss during a jump, others theorized a partial burial to later recover the money. The find reignited public fascination, reinforcing both the reality of the crime and the impossibility of confirming Cooper's fate. If he survived, he had disappeared completely. If he perished, the riverbank discovery was an enduring anomaly. Over the decades, numerous suspects emerged. Some had criminal histories, military experience, or connections to aviation, yet none could be definitively linked to the hijacking. Behavioral analysts reviewed Cooper's actions, noting meticulous planning, knowledge of aircraft operation, and psychological composure. He was methodical, deliberate, and calm under pressure, traits that suggested a disciplined, intelligent individual, likely with experience in both aeronautics and evasion. But despite repeated investigations, including reopening the case in the 2000s, no conclusive evidence has ever surfaced to identify Cooper or determine his fate. The cultural impact of D.B. Cooper is profound. He embodies a paradox, a criminal whose audacity and precision inspired both fear and admiration. His disappearance, without trace or consequence, created a legend that persists in American folklore. Films, books, and documentaries retell the event, often romanticizing the figure who outsmarted authorities and vanished without leaving a footprint. Yet beneath the narrative of clever escape lies a tale of danger, preparation, and luck, reflecting both the risks of defying law enforcement and the unpredictability of survival in extreme conditions. technological and investigative limitations of the early 1970s contributed to the enduring mystery. Aircraft tracking relied on radar systems that could not provide real-time continuous monitoring over certain terrains. Ground-based search and rescue lacked the precision tools available to modern investigators. Evidence collection, particularly of aerial drop zones, was hampered by dense forests, rivers, and nighttime conditions. Even in the decades that followed, advanced techniques like DNA testing, satellite imagery, and forensic analysis have failed to uncover decisive clues. Cooper's disappearance remains a testament to how a combination of preparation, opportunity, and environmental factors can outpace human detection. Psychologists analyzing the case note Cooper's behavior as unusually disciplined. He maintained a calm demeanor, issued clear instructions, and avoided confrontation with passengers or crew. This temperament suggests a careful consideration of risk and consequences. He did not panic, did not reveal his intentions prematurely, and appeared to anticipate potential responses from law enforcement. Whether this intelligence was innate or honed through experience remains a topic of debate, but it underscores why, despite a massive manhunt, the hijacker was never apprehended. The D.B. Cooper case also underscores the vulnerability of human systems. Security protocols of the era, while adequate for routine travel, were insufficient to prevent or immediately respond to the hijacking. The reliance on minimal physical screening, combined with cooperative flight crews and incomplete radar coverage, allowed Cooper to exploit gaps with surgical precision. The event forced lasting changes in airline safety procedures, including increased passenger screening, reinforced cockpit doors, and new security standards to prevent similar hijackings. In this way, Cooper's disappearance altered not just the flight, but the trajectory of civil aviation security in the United States. Nearly 50 years after that night, D.B. Cooper remains a figure of intrigue. Authorities, historians, and amateur sleuths continue to analyze flight paths, topography, weather, and psychological profiles, searching for answers. While the FBI officially closed the case in 2016, the legend endures. Cooper symbolizes the possibility that even in the face of meticulous law enforcement, an individual, armed with planning, composure, and boldness, can vanish completely, leaving only questions and a legacy that refuses to fade. On December 5, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Grazia spotted a strange vessel adrift in the Atlantic Ocean, near the Azores. The ship, a merchant schooner named Mary Celeste, was in remarkable condition, sails intact, cargo secure, and personal belongings undisturbed. Yet, the crew was missing. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their young daughter Sophia, and 7 crew members were nowhere to be found. The ship was seaworthy, provisions and navigational instruments remained on board, and there was no sign of struggle or violence. The mystery was immediate, gripping, and inexplicable. How could a well-provisioned ship, on a routine voyage from New York to Genoa, become deserted in mid-ocean without a trace of its crew? The Mary Celeste had departed New York on November 7, 1872, carrying a cargo of 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol bound for Europe. Captain Briggs, a seasoned mariner known for his competence and caution, commanded the ship with a meticulous hand. The crew of 7 was experienced, loyal, and trustworthy. Sarah Briggs and Sophia, 8 years old, accompanied him on the voyage. Their journey began uneventfully, with calm seas and steady winds guiding them east across the Atlantic. Yet from the very start, the trip carried subtle warnings. The weather was unusually turbulent in early November, and currents along the Atlantic shipping lanes were unpredictable. Despite these challenges, the Mary Celeste sailed competently, reflecting the discipline and care of its captain. When the Dei Grazia's crew boarded the Mary Celeste, they found the vessel in a curious state. Personal effects were in place. The galley was stocked. Lifeboats remained secured. Navigational tools, including sextants and chronometers, were untouched. There were no signs of violence or struggle. Logbooks were intact but revealed only mundane details of the voyage, with entries ceasing abruptly on November 25th. Water and food supplies were sufficient to last weeks, and the ship was not in danger of immediate sinking. The absence of the crew, therefore, defied logic. How could everyone disappear from a functioning ship without leaving clues? What forced them into the open ocean, leaving the ship fully operational and provisioned? Investigators and contemporary press were fascinated and divided. Piracy was considered, yet the Mary Celeste's cargo remained untouched and valuables were secure. A sudden storm or waterspout had been suggested, yet the deck showed no damage, and the rigging was undisturbed. Mutiny was unlikely, given the loyalty and experience of the crew. Other theories proposed foul play, involving insurance fraud or maritime sabotage, but these too lacked evidence. Each explanation, plausible at first glance, unraveled under scrutiny, leaving only uncertainty and speculation. The mystery was compounded by the ocean itself, vast, deep, and indifferent, a natural force capable of erasing evidence and providing no answers. One plausible scenario involves the cargo itself. Denatured alcohol is highly flammable, and barrels had been stored in the hold. A minor leak, combined with the movement of the ship during a swell, could have created fumes. Inhaling concentrated alcohol vapors may have frightened the crew into believing an explosion was imminent. Fearing catastrophe, Captain Briggs may have ordered the lifeboat lowered while the ship was still secure. If the lifeboat was improperly anchored, a sudden wave could have carried it away, leaving the crew stranded in the middle of the Atlantic. While this theory accounts for the flight from the ship, it cannot explain why the crew never returned or why no debris from the lifeboat was found. Another hypothesis centers on natural phenomena. The Atlantic is known for rogue waves, sudden storms, and unpredictable currents. Some experts suggest that a waterspout or sudden squall might have terrified the crew, prompting evacuation. Others speculate that an underwater earthquake or shifting ballast could have created the impression of imminent danger. These scenarios are consistent with the evidence of an orderly, undamaged ship, yet none provide definitive proof. Every natural explanation emphasizes the isolation and vulnerability of sailors on the open ocean, where perception and panic can produce irreversible decisions. Psychological factors may have played a role as well. Captain Briggs, though experienced, may have faced stress from harsh weather, uncertain currents, and the responsibility of transporting valuable cargo with passengers aboard. Anxiety, combined with the pressure to maintain safety and avoid loss, could have led to rapid decision-making under fear. In this context, an overreaction to a perceived threat becomes more plausible. The Mary Celeste, designed for endurance and efficiency, may have seemed suddenly treacherous to those aboard, prompting a decision that appeared rational in the moment but proved fatal. The mystery deepened as the Mary Celeste was brought to Gibraltar, where legal proceedings examined the circumstances of abandonment. Courts concluded that the vessel was seaworthy and that the captain's actions were inexplicable. No charges were filed, as no wrongdoing could be proven. Maritime insurance claims were paid, but the human question remained unanswered. Who exactly abandoned the ship, and why? What became of Captain Briggs, his family, and the crew? These questions persisted, unanswered, fueling fascination in newspapers, books, and maritime lore. Over the years, the Mary Celeste has inspired a host of theories, ranging from plausible to fantastical. Piracy, mutiny, sea monsters, and extraterrestrial abduction have all been suggested, illustrating the enduring human need to explain the inexplicable. The lack of evidence allows the story to evolve in the imagination, yet it also reflects real historical uncertainty. The Mary Celeste stands as a testament to the dangers of maritime life, the unpredictability of the sea, and the limits of human understanding when confronted by vast, indifferent forces. The ship itself survived decades after the incident, changing ownership and continuing service under various flags. It eventually foundered off the coast of Haiti in 1885 during a hurricane, a tragic but unrelated end to a vessel already immortalized in legend. Historians and maritime enthusiasts study its voyages, cargo manifests, and weather logs, seeking clues to explain the 1872 disappearance. Every detail, wind speed, ocean current, ship layout, offers potential insight, yet none provides certainty. The story persists because the intersection of evidence, absence, and mystery is compelling, a narrative both grounded in fact and suspended in uncertainty. The Mary Celeste remains emblematic of unexplained disappearances at sea. Unlike vanishings on land, where footprints, witnesses, or surveillance can provide guidance, maritime mysteries involve vast, often untraceable spaces. A single decision, whether to abandon ship, to navigate differently, or to misinterpret danger, can leave no trace, erasing lives and creating enduring enigmas. The Mary Celeste continues to captivate historians, sailors, and the public because it represents both human resilience and vulnerability, courage and fear, control and surrender in the face of the unknown. Ultimately, the story of the Mary Celeste endures because it is unsolved. It is a puzzle of human choice, environmental unpredictability, and the unknowable depths of the ocean. Captain Briggs and his crew vanished without a trace, leaving behind a ship intact, a cargo preserved, and a narrative that continues to haunt maritime history. Every search for evidence, every new hypothesis, underscores a fundamental truth. Sometimes the answers we seek lie beyond reach, lost to the vast, silent expanse of the sea. On the morning of January 26, 1966, Adelaide, South Australia, was alive with the summer holiday spirit. It was Australia Day, and families flocked to Glenelg Beach, a seaside suburb known for its golden sand and lively promenade. Among them were the Beaumont children, Jane, aged 9, Arna, 7, and Grant, 4. Dressed in bright summer clothing, they carried picnic bags and excited chatter, eager to spend the day at the beach. Their mother, Nancy Beaumont, had entrusted them with a simple task: walk from the nearby bus stop to the beach, a journey they had made countless times. But that afternoon, the Beaumont children would vanish, leaving behind one of the most haunting and enduring mysteries in Australian history. The children were last seen around 10 a.m., strolling along the crowded esplanade. Witnesses described them as cheerful, waving to passers-by, and holding hands. At some point, a man, a stranger in the crowd, approached them, asking for directions or offering guidance, according to differing accounts. What happened next is shrouded in uncertainty. When their mother arrived at the beach shortly after, her children were nowhere to be found. The crowd was bustling, but no one reported seeing the children leave with anyone. Panic set in quickly, and local authorities were alerted. Within hours, search parties combed the beach, surrounding streets, and nearby parks, but no trace of the children emerged. The immediate investigation revealed no clues. The children's clothing, bags, and personal items were left on the beach. There were no signs of struggle or witnesses to an abduction, apart from conflicting reports of a suspicious man. Police canvassed the area, interviewing hundreds of beachgoers, shopkeepers, and local residents, but the initial search yielded no tangible leads. The lack of evidence heightened concern, as the disappearance of 3 children in broad daylight seemed impossible, yet entirely real. Every parent in Adelaide was gripped by fear, while the national media quickly turned the story into a focal point of public anxiety and outrage. As the days progressed, the investigation expanded. Officers examined possible scenarios: accidental drowning, runaway incidents, or deliberate abduction. Drowning seemed unlikely, as witnesses confirmed the children never reached the water. The idea of running away was implausible given their ages and temperament. Abduction quickly emerged as the leading hypothesis. Authorities considered individuals with prior criminal records, suspicious behavior, or potential motive for targeting children. Yet despite extensive searches, surveillance of known offenders, and the distribution of missing person posters across South Australia, no substantial leads appeared. The case grew colder, and frustration mounted on all sides. Several witnesses provided descriptions of a man seen speaking to the children before their disappearance. Accounts varied, but he was generally described as middle-aged, of medium build, and wearing neat clothing, possibly a jacket over a light shirt. Some said he spoke with an Australian accent, others thought he might be foreign. He was observed offering help or directions, though it is unclear whether the children followed him voluntarily. This man became central to the investigation, though his identity has never been confirmed. Over the decades, hundreds of tips have suggested suspects fitting similar descriptions, but none could be definitively linked to the Beaumont children. The case attracted enormous media attention. Newspapers across Australia published photographs, family portraits, and reconstructions of the day. The government, schools, and local organizations mobilized volunteers for searches, organized community meetings, and provided support for the devastated Beaumont family. Despite the public and official attention, the trail remained cold. Police faced criticism and pressure, with every potential clue scrutinized and many leads turning out to be false or misdirected. Over time, the story entered the national consciousness, becoming a cautionary tale about child safety and the vulnerability of youth, particularly in public spaces. Several suspects emerged over the years, but none could be confirmed. One individual, later convicted of other crimes against children, was suspected due to circumstantial evidence but was never charged in connection with the Beaumont case. Another theory involved transient workers or travelers in the region who may have had access to the beach on that day. Investigators also considered organized crime connections, although evidence supporting this was minimal. DNA technology, not available at the time, has provided no resolution, as there is no physical evidence conclusively linking any suspect to the disappearance. The lack of forensic material continues to hinder closure. The psychological impact of the disappearance was profound. Nancy Beaumont endured years of uncertainty, clinging to hope while grappling with despair. The surviving family members carried the emotional weight of loss compounded by ambiguity. Communities across South Australia and the broader nation faced their own shock and grief, seeing ordinary life disrupted by a crime that struck at innocence. Schools introduced policies to improve child supervision, while media coverage sparked public discourse about safety and responsibility. The Beaumont disappearance catalyzed systemic reflection on how children could vanish in plain sight and why prevention remained critical. The mystery also inspired numerous theories, some more elaborate than others. Some believed the children had been kidnapped for ransom, though no demands were ever made. Others speculated that they were taken by an individual with psychopathic tendencies, acting alone in an impulsive and violent manner. Certain investigators have suggested the involvement of a transient itinerant, or a drifter familiar with the area, capable of observing the children unnoticed. Each scenario offered a plausible explanation but lacked corroborating evidence. The enduring uncertainty has allowed speculation to flourish, reinforcing the story's place in Australian cultural memory. Decades of investigation, appeals, and media coverage have failed to produce definitive answers. The case remains open in South Australia, but leads are rare and often speculative. Periodically, tips from the public surface, individuals claiming to have seen the children, or men confessing knowledge, but none have produced conclusive results. The original witnesses have aged, memories have faded, and physical evidence is largely non-existent. What remains is the narrative of three children who vanished on a sunny summer day, leaving behind a grieving family, a bewildered community, and an unsolved chapter in the history of disappearances. The disappearance of the Beaumont children illustrates the fragility of safety, even in public and familiar settings. It underscores the unpredictability of human behavior and the difficulty of safeguarding children in environments perceived as secure. The case remains a touchstone in criminal history and social consciousness, demonstrating both the persistence of hope and the weight of unresolved trauma. The children, their story, and the mystery surrounding their fate continue to haunt investigators, families, and communities across generations. On the night of May 14, 2008, Brandon Swanson, a 19-year-old from Marshall, Minnesota, left a party after an evening with friends and family. He had been celebrating graduation from high school and had driven his car into the nearby town. Around 2:30 a.m., Brandon called his parents on his cell phone. His voice was calm but tinged with confusion. He explained that he had driven into a ditch on a rural gravel road, his car stuck in the mud, and that he could not see any landmarks in the darkness. He asked his parents for directions so he could walk to safety. What followed would become a chilling testament to how quickly a familiar landscape can turn alien, and how abruptly a life can vanish. Brandon's mother and father, Jack and Barb Swanson, listened intently over the phone as he described the location. Brandon was on a straight road with fields stretching on either side, reporting that he could see only darkness and the faint glow of headlights from distant vehicles. His description was precise. The ditch on the south side of the road, a turn he could not quite identify, and the sense that he was moving cautiously. He planned to walk toward the nearest town while his parents guided him, but the conversation ended abruptly. Brandon exclaimed, "Oh crap!" and then the line went dead. Attempts to call back immediately failed. That moment, mere seconds, would mark the last known contact anyone had with him. Police mobilized quickly after Brandon failed to return home. The area where he had last been seen was rural, sparsely populated, and difficult to navigate in darkness. Search and rescue teams canvassed roads, fields, and waterways using vehicles, flashlights, and helicopters. Volunteers joined the effort, combing the terrain with dogs and marking locations of potential evidence. Despite these efforts, no sign of Brandon, no footprints, clothing, or personal effects, was found. The rural landscape, seemingly familiar, became an impassable labyrinth of uncertainty. The combination of darkness, uneven terrain, and the vast expanse of farmland meant that every search effort faced formidable challenges. Investigators reconstructed Brandon's movements based on phone records, witness reports, and the geography of the area. His last known position, triangulated through cell towers, suggested he had walked south from the ditch. Roads in the vicinity were narrow and intersected by deep drainage ditches, dense vegetation, and farm equipment. Brandon was described as wearing a hoodie and jeans, carrying his wallet and cell phone, and likely unprepared for prolonged exposure to the early summer night. Temperatures hovered near 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that disorientation and exposure could quickly become life-threatening. Yet no physical trace appeared, as if he had vanished entirely into the landscape. Search teams also considered the possibility of vehicular accident or abduction. Investigators examined nearby vehicles, questioned local residents, and canvassed surrounding towns. Tips flooded in, some plausible, some misdirected. Witnesses reported seeing a young man matching Brandon's description walking along certain stretches of road, yet these sightings were never confirmed. A nearby river and marshland were searched thoroughly, as were abandoned buildings and sheds, but every lead culminated in emptiness. Even areas with dense tree lines and hidden gullies produced no clues. The disappearance became a paradox, a man visible one moment on a cell phone screen, gone the next, leaving nothing behind. Psychologists analyzing the case emphasized Brandon's calm demeanor during the call. He followed instructions, described his surroundings accurately, and maintained focus despite his predicament. This suggests a level of situational awareness inconsistent with typical panic-induced behavior, which makes his sudden disappearance all the more perplexing. If he had simply wandered off, one would expect traces of movement, footprints, disturbed vegetation, or other signs of passage. The absence of such evidence highlights either extraordinary circumstances or an explanation beyond normal expectation, amplifying the sense of mystery and unease. The investigation also highlighted the challenges of rural search and rescue operations. Sparse lighting, few road markers, and the lack of immediate technological aids complicated efforts. The Swansons' knowledge of the area provided some guidance, but even local familiarity could not account for the confusion created by intersecting roads and the isolation of the landscape at night. Authorities acknowledged that Brandon's vanishing occurred within a window too short for conventional search methods to be effective, suggesting that he may have traveled only a short distance before encountering an unknown hazard or an unforeseen event. Over the years, the case generated theories and speculation. Some suggested Brandon may have accidentally fallen into a drainage ditch or creek, with his body carried away by water. Others speculated about foul play, positing the involvement of an opportunistic criminal who happened to be in the vicinity. A small number of investigators considered the idea that he became lost in a network of hidden paths or abandoned rural structures, but searches produced no evidence to support this. Every scenario was constrained by the stark reality. Brandon left no trace behind, no objects, no footprints, no indication of struggle. The public and media response intensified as the search continued. Coverage highlighted the emotional toll on the family, the frustration of local authorities, and the broader implications for child and young adult safety in rural regions. Communities offered support through volunteer searches, fundraising, and awareness campaigns. Yet the sense of helplessness persisted. A young man, bright, responsible, and cautious, had disappeared in broad daylight into a familiar yet alien landscape, leaving behind only questions that have never been answered. In the years since Brandon Swanson vanished, authorities have maintained an open file. Periodically, tips arrive, anonymously through social media, or from distant observers claiming sightings, but none have yielded concrete evidence. The case is often cited in discussions of missing person investigations, highlighting both the limitations of early warning systems in rural areas and the critical importance of immediate, coordinated responses. Despite the modern era's technological advantages, Brandon's disappearance illustrates how quickly someone can vanish without trace, even under circumstances that seem controlled and observable. The disappearance remains haunting because it is both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in the sense that Brandon was engaged in a routine activity, driving, walking home, calling his parents. Extraordinary in the result, a vanishing that defies explanation, leaving only speculation and grief. It reminds investigators, families, and the public of the fragility of human perception in unfamiliar or compromised environments. It underscores the unpredictable combination of geography, timing, and circumstance that can erase a person from all records and moments, transforming the familiar into the incomprehensible. Brandon Swanson's case endures as a somber chapter in the narrative of unresolved disappearances. It is a study in environmental danger, human error, and the cruel unpredictability of life in isolated areas. Every reconstruction, every theory, and every search emphasizes a single, inescapable reality. He was last seen alive and well, and yet he disappeared completely. The window between visibility and absence in rural spaces is narrow, and for Brandon Swanson, that window closed in an instant, leaving only questions, theories, and a persistent ache for answers that may never come. On the morning of February 9, 2004, Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, packed her car and drove toward the New Hampshire countryside. She told her professors she needed a few days off due to a family emergency, though no one reported her traveling before or after class. Maura was considered intelligent, composed, and responsible. Friends and acquaintances described her as independent and capable, yet prone to bouts of anxiety and stress. That day, she would vanish into the white wilderness of the Granite State, leaving behind an enduring mystery that has perplexed investigators, journalists, and armchair sleuths alike. Maura's journey began on Route 112, a winding highway cutting through the forests of western New Hampshire. Around 7:30 p.m., a passing motorist noticed her car, a dark blue 1996 Saturn sedan, pulled over on the side of the road. The front end had struck a snowbank, and the vehicle appeared damaged. Maura was seen outside, apparently attempting to assess the situation. The motorist later reported that she seemed calm but appeared to be gathering her belongings. Shortly afterward, a local man driving home from work stopped to offer assistance. According to his later testimony, Maura seemed polite yet evasive, offering minimal explanation for her situation. She accepted a ride to a nearby phone to call someone, presumably a family member, but disappeared before making contact. When authorities arrived, her car was abandoned, containing personal items, textbooks, and credit cards, but no Maura. The initial response involved local law enforcement, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from surrounding communities. The terrain surrounding Route 112 was rugged and densely forested, dotted with streams, snow-covered hills, and unmarked trails. Nightfall complicated the search, reducing visibility and increasing the risks of exposure. Authorities scoured the area with dogs, snowmobiles, and ATVs, yet no trace of Maura emerged. Her disappearance prompted questions about whether she had ventured into the wilderness voluntarily, been abducted, or encountered an accident. The absence of footprints, drag marks, or signs of struggle deepened the sense of mystery, as if the landscape itself had swallowed her whole. Maura's disappearance drew national attention quickly. Investigators reviewed her recent activities, financial records, emails, phone calls, and personal habits. Some indicated stress related to her academic and personal life. Others suggested she might have planned a brief escape. Friends reported she had been considering taking a short trip to New Hampshire, though none could confirm a specific destination or reason. Her family described her as independent yet cautious, unlikely to disappear without contact or explanation. This ambiguity fueled theories ranging from voluntary disappearance to foul play, each theory carrying weight in the absence of definitive evidence. Witness reports provided only fragmented clues. Some motorists claimed to have seen a young woman walking along the shoulder of Route 112. Others suggested a figure moving into the tree line, disappearing into shadows and snow. These observations, however, were inconsistent and could not be corroborated with physical evidence. Her abandoned vehicle remained a focal point for investigators, revealing only that Maura had left behind possessions deliberately yet hurriedly. The absence of fingerprints beyond her own or evidence of forced entry suggested that, at least initially, she had been in control of her movements, whatever they might have been. Theories about Maura's fate proliferated. Some suggested she had gotten lost in the forests and succumbed to hypothermia, exposure, or injury. New Hampshire winters are unforgiving, with temperatures often plunging below freezing and snowfall making navigation treacherous. Others proposed that she had been abducted by an opportunistic criminal, given the isolation of Route 112 and the lack of witnesses. Some investigations considered links to prior criminal activity in the region, though none yielded substantive evidence. A few researchers posited that Maura staged her disappearance deliberately, though motivations remained speculative. Every hypothesis confronted the same obstacle: a lack of physical evidence and no confirmed sightings. The investigation also examined Maura's personal life for context. Police reviewed her academic history, social interactions, and mental health. Friends described her as intelligent, independent, and occasionally private about her emotions. Financial records showed routine transactions, though some were unusual for a student, such as small withdrawals and fuel purchases outside her usual patterns. These details suggested a degree of planning, yet nothing definitively pointed to her intentions or potential destination. Her disappearance, unlike an impulsive vanishing, appeared to involve forethought, at least in terms of preparation, but the absence of clarity leaves all interpretations speculative. Search and rescue efforts extended over days, then weeks, with assistance from local hikers, volunteers, and K-9 units trained for human tracking. Terrain challenges were significant: forests dense with evergreens, snow-covered paths obscuring any tracks, frozen rivers, and rugged hills. Despite aerial searches, ground sweeps, and sonar scans in nearby waterways, no trace of Maura was located. Investigators later admitted that a combination of factors, limited visibility, terrain complexity, and time elapsed before reporting, significantly hindered the likelihood of finding evidence. Every search returned empty-handed, compounding both frustration and despair. Over time, Maura Murray's disappearance became emblematic of unsolved missing person cases in rural America. It inspired documentaries, podcasts, and investigative journalism, each exploring potential leads, timelines, and behavioral analyses. Online communities dedicated to examining her case have debated every detail, from the angle of her parked car to weather conditions and patterns of human behavior. Some theorists suggest that Maura may have intentionally disappeared to start a new life, citing subtle indications in her recent planning and preparations. Others emphasize environmental dangers and argue that she likely became a casualty of the unforgiving winter wilderness. Each narrative reflects both fascination with and fear of the unknown. The enduring mystery also highlights the limitations of mid- and early 2000s search and rescue technology. Though cell phones were in use, GPS tracking was not as precise as today's standards. Sparse rural infrastructure and challenging terrain further complicated efforts. The combination of human error, environmental hazards, and incomplete evidence underscores how quickly someone can vanish in rural landscapes, leaving only objects, speculation, and profound uncertainty behind. Maura's disappearance remains a cautionary example of both personal vulnerability and the unpredictability of wilderness settings. To this day, Maura Murray's fate is unknown. Investigators continue to consider leads, re-examine evidence, and solicit information from the public, yet no definitive resolution has been achieved. Her abandoned vehicle remains a symbolic artifact of the mystery, orderly yet incomplete, deliberate yet enigmatic. The case underscores the fragility of human presence in the vast, isolated landscapes that surround Route 112, illustrating how a single individual can disappear, leaving no trace, in a place seemingly familiar and yet full of danger. Maura Murray's story endures in public imagination because it embodies both the ordinary and the extraordinary. Ordinary in that she was a student, a young adult, and a familiar figure to friends and family. Extraordinary in that she vanished without a trace, leaving the landscape full of possibilities and impossibilities. Her disappearance raises questions about choice, accident, and potential criminal intervention, highlighting the fragility of safety in rural, isolated regions. Every theory underscores a harsh truth. Sometimes, people vanish in ways that defy both expectation and explanation, leaving only speculation to fill the void. In May 1845, Sir John Franklin, a seasoned Royal Navy officer, commanded HMS Erebus and HMS Terror on an expedition to chart the final section of the Northwest Passage, a treacherous maritime route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Arctic archipelago. Franklin, 59 years old, was accompanied by 129 officers and men, each trained for the rigors of naval exploration. The ships were provisioned for 3 years, loaded with food, supplies, coal, and sledging equipment. On the surface, the expedition was meticulously planned. But within months of entering the icy waters of the Canadian Arctic, the crew of Franklin's ships vanished, leaving behind one of the most haunting mysteries of the 19th century. The expedition departed from Greenhithe, England, on May 19, 1845, heading west toward Baffin Bay. At the time, the Northwest Passage had long eluded explorers, its waters notorious for shifting ice, unpredictable weather, and vast stretches of uncharted territory. Franklin's vessels, reinforced for ice navigation and equipped with steam engines, represented the pinnacle of contemporary naval engineering. Yet, despite careful preparation, the Arctic environment was a formidable adversary. Within weeks, the ships passed into increasingly remote regions where ice floes and frigid temperatures limited mobility and communication. No further messages reached Europe after the ship's last recorded sighting by whalers in July 1845. By 1847, concern in England had grown acute. The Admiralty organized multiple search expeditions, dispatching ships and teams to trace Franklin's route. Sailors, Inuit guides, and officers combed the labyrinth of islands, channels, and frozen straits, yet they found only abandoned equipment, scattered personal effects, and occasional graves of crew members who had succumbed to exposure. Inuit testimony described 2 ships trapped in ice, with men wandering the ice floes, ill and disoriented. Reports suggested starvation, scurvy, and hypothermia had begun taking their toll. Still, the full fate of Franklin and his crew remained unknown. Every clue hinted at survival attempts, yet the final outcome was obscured by centuries of ice and distance. Archaeologists and historians later reconstructed the likely sequence of events. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror became trapped in pack ice near King William Island. The crew overwintered, hoping for the ice to release the ships in the spring. But the Arctic conditions were relentless. Temperatures dropped below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Food supplies dwindled despite canned provisions, and scurvy weakened even the strongest men. Survivors abandoned the ships in a desperate bid to reach mainland settlements or trade posts, traveling over ice, snow, and frozen rivers. They carried minimal equipment, relying on sledges and makeshift clothing, yet none reached safety. Corpses discovered decades later bore evidence of starvation, exposure, and in some cases, desperate measures for survival, including signs of cannibalism, a grim testament to human endurance pushed beyond limits. The first concrete evidence emerged in the 1850s when search parties found fragments of the expedition, sledges, clothing, and journals preserved in ice. Inuit communities recounted encounters with wandering men who spoke of ships locked in ice and companions who had perished. Later discoveries confirmed that some crew members had attempted to trek southward, leaving traces along the coastlines of King William Island and Victoria Strait. Archaeological investigations revealed skeletal remains, worn boots, and scattered personal items, offering fragmentary insight into the final days. The evidence painted a picture of meticulous planning undone by an unforgiving environment, a combination of ambition, technology, and nature converging in tragedy. Over the next century, numerous expeditions attempted to locate the wrecks of Erebus and Terror. Despite Inuit accounts and increasingly sophisticated technology, the ships remained elusive. In 2014, researchers using sonar located HMS Erebus in Wilmette and Crampton Bay, and in 2016, HMS Terror was found in Terror Bay, confirming suspicions about their final positions. Examination of the wrecks revealed damage consistent with ice pressure, and analysis of the preserved materials provided additional insight into the conditions the crew endured. The ships themselves, entombed in ice and preserved by Arctic waters, became haunting artifacts of an epic disappearance, a reminder of the fragility of human endeavor in extreme environments. The human story is equally compelling. Franklin's leadership, while praised for its courage and planning, faced the insurmountable challenge of extreme isolation. Crew members endured relentless cold, malnutrition, and mental strain, often in darkness for months at a time. Letters, journals, and recovered artifacts suggest both discipline and desperation, moments of cooperation alongside acts of survival-driven individualism. The expedition illustrates how meticulous preparation can fail against the Arctic's immutable forces, and how human beings confront mortality when cut off from civilization. The mystery endures because it is not only a tale of vanished ships but of vanished people, of lives extinguished in a silent, frozen expanse. The disappearance had lasting cultural and scientific impact. For decades, Franklin became a symbol of exploration, heroism, and the tragic consequences of ambition. The Royal Navy instituted changes in expedition planning, including improved provisions, more realistic timelines, and enhanced communication strategies. Literature, art, and folklore immortalized the story, emphasizing both the heroism of the explorers and the inexorable power of nature. Inuit narratives preserved an oral history, providing insight into the interactions between European explorers and indigenous communities, and offering critical clues that ultimately helped locate the wrecks. These stories underscore the enduring fascination with exploration, disappearance, and human resilience. The Franklin expedition also reshaped Arctic understanding. Cartographers and scientists learned from the wrecks, the abandoned campsites, and the recovered journals about ice patterns, navigational hazards, and survival strategies. Modern expeditions have studied food preservation techniques, ship construction, and crew health, informed by both success and failure. The tragedy highlights the intersection of technology, human ambition, and environmental unpredictability, demonstrating that even the best prepared teams may succumb to forces beyond their control. Franklin's disappearance exemplifies both the allure and the peril of exploration in extreme environments. Ultimately, the lost Franklin expedition remains haunting because it blends the ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in its intent, mapping and navigating, following scientific curiosity, serving the crown. Extraordinary in its outcome, 129 lives lost, ships entombed in ice, and generations of investigators attempting to reconstruct events from fragmentary evidence. The Arctic, vast and indifferent, became both the stage and antagonist, erasing certainty and amplifying the unknown. Franklin's expedition reminds the modern observer that even in an age of planning, preparation, and knowledge, disappearance can occur, leaving questions that endure across centuries, frozen as securely as the ships themselves. In December 1930, Canadian fur trapper Joe LaBelle was traveling near Anjikuni Lake, in the remote wilderness of northern Manitoba, when he made a discovery that would become one of Canada's most enduring mysteries. LaBelle, a solitary figure accustomed to the hardships of northern life, had traveled countless miles across frozen lakes, snow-laden forests, and treacherous tundra. But nothing in his years of trapping and trading could have prepared him for what he would find that winter: an entire Inuit village abandoned without explanation, as if its residents had vanished into thin air. LaBelle had initially stopped to check on the village, a small collection of huts clustered along the lake's edge, traditionally inhabited by Inuit families who had lived in the region for generations. As he approached, he noticed that smoke no longer rose from the chimneys, dogs wandered aimlessly without handlers, and sleds lay unattended. The village dogs, normally chained or tethered, were loose and barking, seemingly confused by the absence of their owners. Food, tools, clothing, and everyday possessions remained in place, freshly prepared meals, blankets, and personal items abandoned as if time had stopped mid-routine. It was an eerie scene, a village frozen in ordinary life, yet completely devoid of its human inhabitants. Alarmed, LaBelle reported the discovery to local authorities in the nearby trading post, prompting an investigation that became legendary. When police and government officials arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the village and surrounding area. Homes were intact, personal belongings scattered naturally across floors, and stored food untouched. Fireplaces still contained smoldering embers, suggesting that the residents had left suddenly. Dogs were still chained near their dwellings, and snowshoe tracks led to the lake, but none continued beyond a certain point. No signs of struggle, blood, or footprints indicated violence, or a forced departure. Yet the community had vanished entirely. The mystery of Anjikuni Lake quickly entered folklore. The most commonly cited report comes from Frank Edwards, a journalist and author, who described the scene as an entire settlement gone, leaving behind every trace of domestic life. While some skepticism has surrounded details of Edwards' accounts, corroborating testimony from trappers and Inuit elders confirmed that unusual disappearances were not entirely unheard of in isolated northern villages. The combination of remote geography, harsh winter conditions, and small population sizes made northern communities both resilient and vulnerable. Yet the scale and suddenness of the Anjikuni disappearance remain exceptional. Over the decades, theories about the disappearance multiplied. Some researchers suggest natural disasters as the cause, an avalanche, sudden severe storm, or ice-driven flood that forced residents to flee. While extreme weather is common in the region, no evidence of environmental catastrophe was documented at the village site. Trees remained standing, lakes were intact, and structures showed no signs of collapse. Another hypothesis involves disease or epidemic, which has historically affected isolated populations. Yet there were no signs of illness or bodies left behind. Archaeological surveys found the village intact, with no skeletal remains to suggest sudden mortality. The absence of physical evidence left the mystery unsolved and fueled speculation. Some accounts suggest the villagers may have moved deliberately, leaving possessions behind as part of ritualistic or survival-driven relocation. Inuit oral histories emphasize the fluidity of settlement patterns, as families sometimes moved to follow game, avoid harsh weather, or join allied communities. However, even by these cultural norms, abandoning all personal belongings, food stores, and domesticated dogs without warning is atypical. The suddenness and completeness of the disappearance, without leaving even minimal markers of their route, suggested extraordinary circumstances, beyond the ordinary patterns of northern life. More sensational theories emerged over time, reflecting humanity's fascination with the unexplained. Some speculated about alien abduction, suggesting that a technologically advanced force could remove a population instantaneously. Others proposed paranormal explanations, citing Inuit legends of spirits and beings capable of displacing humans. These theories, while captivating to popular imagination, lack evidentiary support and remain in the realm of speculation. Yet the story endured, repeated in newspapers, folklore collections, and paranormal anthologies, in part because the village seemed to vanish not just physically but from historical record, leaving only the frozen scene LaBelle had first encountered. The Anjikuni Lake disappearance also underscores the isolation of northern settlements. In 1930, communities were accessible only by long treks, dog sleds, or small aircraft. Communication with government or trading posts was limited, creating conditions in which anomalies could go unreported for months or even years. This geographic isolation amplifies the eerie quality of the story, a thriving village could vanish without immediate notice, and the sheer scale of wilderness surrounding the site means that natural clues, such as footprints, sled tracks, or overturned objects, could be erased by snow, wind, or wildlife within hours. The environment itself, indifferent and powerful, contributes to the haunting nature of the disappearance. Investigators and historians have attempted to reconcile the available facts. Some suggest that Joe LaBelle's accounts may have been embellished or misremembered over time. Skeptics argue that smaller-scale migration or temporary relocation could have been mistaken for total disappearance. Others contend that harsh winter conditions, combined with the natural rhythm of Inuit settlement patterns, created the illusion of abandonment. Yet the enduring fascination lies not merely in whether the village truly vanished in a paranormal sense, but in the human response to the inexplicable, the anxiety, speculation, and enduring questions that a single winter visit by a solitary trapper could provoke. The story of Anjikuni Lake also resonates because it symbolizes vulnerability in remote regions. Human communities, no matter how resilient, are subject to the whims of environment, health, and circumstance. The sudden absence of an entire village, if accurately reported, demonstrates how quickly ordinary life can be disrupted in places where assistance is far away and survival depends on vigilance, knowledge, and adaptability. It serves as both a historical curiosity and a cautionary tale about the fragility of settlement in the harshest landscapes on Earth. Ultimately, the vanished village of Anjikuni Lake endures as an unresolved mystery. No bodies were recovered, no definitive evidence of environmental disaster or human conflict was found, and the residents' fate remains unknown. Archaeological surveys have revealed the general locations of historical Inuit dwellings, yet none provide clues about a sudden disappearance. Researchers continue to examine historical records, oral accounts, and environmental data, but centuries later, the story retains its enigmatic power. The lake, the village site, and the surrounding wilderness remain quiet witnesses to an event that eludes explanation. The haunting quality of Anjikuni Lake lies in its combination of ordinary life and sudden disappearance. Dogs left unfed, fires still smoldering, and food and tools abandoned as if interrupted mid-task suggest a reality frozen in time. Unlike disappearances in urban contexts, which often leave witnesses, cameras, or records, this vanished northern community illustrates how isolation can magnify mystery, making the unknown feel immediate and chilling. The village remains an enduring symbol of human vulnerability in the face of natural and unexplained forces, a story that continues to intrigue, unsettle, and inspire speculation.